Today on The Dead Life, I want to talk about the scary part of life, dying. Why are we afraid to die? Is it because it's the unknown? Is it because it's one of the rare times in life that we're forced to go it alone? Today's guest is Lynn Principe. She's a death doula. She helps people to transition from this life to the next. She knows better than most people what dying looks like. Today, we're going to hear her experiences, and some of you may find a personal calling to become a death doula. She'll tell you how you can become a crossing guard for the dying. You can follow me on Instagram at Medium Allison. You can find me on my Facebook fan page. You can binge on my YouTube videos, including Street Astrology, and you can join my Scottsdale audience on May 6th for live readings. For ticket information, go to AllisonDubois.com. General admission tickets are available. VIP tickets are sold out. If you have a question about the paranormal for me, call me at 802-332-3811 and leave a message about your experience. Lynn, thank you for sitting down with me today.
Thank you for having me back. I'm happy to speak with you again.
Well, I find you fascinating. I deal with people once they've passed, and you deal with them in the transition, which I find a vital part of a soul's life experience is the in-between when they are transitioning.
Yeah.
So what happened that inspired you to be a death doula?
Well, first I want to say that I loved how you called it a crossing guard. I've heard it called so many things, and that's the first time I've heard crossing guard. So I might have to use that one.
Yeah, feel free. It just popped into my head when I was writing the intro, so I'm good with that.
It's perfect. Well, like most people, I didn't grow up thinking that I wanted to work with dying people. That's not something that we know that we have within us, and that ability. My great uncle called it grit. I took care of my great aunt and great uncle in their late 80s into their 90s. They had no children. And especially my aunt, she was so generous with her dying process. And she explained everything she was seeing and feeling. And, I got to see and hear when she was really ready to go. And it was a beautiful thing. And in fact, that night when she died, she appeared to my great uncle in his dreams. And he was a very pragmatic man. So the next morning he called me and he said, Mary's gone. And what happened was in his sleep, he saw her getting up out of her bed at the hospice house and walking down the hallway toward the exit sign. And she had had polio and wasn't walking with she wasn't walking with her walker. And so my uncle was calling out to the nurse in his sleep, she's going to fall. Make sure she has her walker. And she just kept going.
Oh, wow.
So that I have so many beautiful stories just like that really remind me of just the beautiful mysteries that are possible at the end of life.
Yeah.
Really the first one.
I mean,
yeah.
So that was when sort of life took you there.
Absolutely.
It was you needed to be there for your family, but you also were able to navigate it in a way that didn't traumatize you. It actually touched you.
It really did. And then I would sit by her bedside. Then I'd go home and write about it because I didn't want to forget all the little details. She was explaining the ancestors that she saw at her bedside and people that I couldn't see. And they were my ancestors. So it was it meant so much to me that she was doing that. And then I inherited Uncle Frank after she died, and I took care of him for 7 years. And that was a different experience. That taught me a lot more about advocating for someone who's dying and really the practical ways that I am a death doula now.
Wow. I mean, that's a lot of people see it as a burden when they are in a position to, and they're the only relative to take care of somebody who's dying, because often they feel like they lose some of their self-respect. They can't do things for themselves. They have to look to a younger generation to be that person for them when they're used to taking care of everybody else. So I often, when I bring them through, hear them say they didn't want to be a burden to anyone because they were a proud person.
Yes, that makes perfect sense, especially in his case. And we often questioned, how we ended up in this lifetime together, because he wasn't someone that I grew up being close to, but here we were in this time and place. And now I know exactly why I was there, because now I feel like I'm doing what I was meant to do. So I'm grateful.
It's funny how life works, right?
Absolutely. And he would say things to me like, "Oh, I'm being treated like a potted plant," and all these little, frankisms that I have in my head that um, they taught me a lot about dying with dignity, and so I'm grateful for it.
Well, and I, thank you for giving of yourself in those moments because you allowed them to die with dignity. And I don't think that's a luxury everybody,
We
unfortunately, they don't get.
Right, we all
So,
deserve that.
yes, I agree.
Mhm.
How long have you been an end of life practitioner?
So I consider myself that was really the beginning for me. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I started off being a hospice volunteer, as many of us do, and that was about 15, 16 years ago. So I've been at the bedside for many, many people just as a volunteer. And especially where I live, I'm in Florida, and there's a lot of elderly people here without
Yes.
family. And so I find myself at the bedside of people who have no one. And maybe I've never met them before, but I'm going to stay as long as I can just so they have someone to be by their side. And so that taught me a lot about what death looks like and
Right.
inspired me to do it differently. That's heartbreaking to see that
Yes.
happen. And so once I found out what a death doula was, it was probably 2017, 2018. I did the training right away because it was like the answer to my prayers.
So, what kind of training does a person need to become a death doula?
That's a really good question. It depends on the certifying school. So, like a lot of things, Death Doula is not nationally certified. So, you're going to be certified by whomever teaches you. And so that means
Hmm.
only as much as the reputation of that school, right? And there are
Right.
pros and cons to that. I love that we have autonomy. I'm able to work the way that I want, within the scope of practice that's ethical.
Hmm.
Um, but I'm not, say, like a hospice nurse where I'm stuck to my computer with paperwork, right? I can really make
Right.
this work my own. Um, I found the Conscious Dying Institute, it really suited my needs. And there are many programs out there, but I liked that one specifically because it was longer than most. And I felt like they went a lot deeper in the spiritual and emotional sense because you have to peel back your own layers. And maybe I imagine this is true for you. In order to do that with others, you have to really know who you are and face your
Right.
own fears first. And I feel like that program, they really do a good job with that.
So the Conscious Dying Institute, is this something that's in a particular state or can people find it online?
When I took my course, they were doing in person trainings all over the country. And now they're
Hmm.
primarily online, like most trainings.
Okay.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Most, that's very true.
Hmm.
Um, so when they're taking this training, I mean, there's probably only so much that can be taught via Zoom or online with the literature. Do they have to spend a certain amount of hours shadowing somebody in the field?
Well, that really depends on the program. Some programs really do require that.
Uh-huh.
I'm no longer teaching at the Conscious Young Institute, and what I've started doing is mentoring doulas because I feel like they do trainings wherever they
Yes.
go, and then they come out of the training and they still feel like they need a little bit more. And so that's something that I've been doing.
I think the mentoring is such an important part of teaching because, especially with practices where it requires you to be hands on and the stakes are really high
Hmm.
when it comes to somebody's well being and their state of mind and their spiritual state being in your hands
Right.
at that time. I would think the more hours they got shadowing, the better. I know that I've got my dead university for my students,
Mhm.
and I let them see me doing readings. So, and my practice of how, the steps I take and how I treat a client or speak to them, what you need to say, how you start, how you end a reading. And it helps them to become more comfortable with it rather than trying to figure it out blindly. So I'm a big advocate of, having that sort of internship, if you will.
I think so too. And honestly, I think the biggest part is getting yourself grounded because
Yeah,
you don't know what you're going to walk into. Honestly,
right.
it can be an emotional time. A lot of feelings come up in family, a lot of family dynamics, and you want to be the most grounded thing in the room.
Well, and illnesses like Parkinson's, they can become combative. So in situations like that, that could be traumatic for the person trying to help the person who's dying,
Sure.
because they're not really themselves and they can't help themselves. And sometimes you physically could feel affronted, by that person. So I would imagine, a lot of people with mediums, they just assume people die in one of two ways, cancer or heart attacks. This is not the case. There are many different ways to die, and there are different types of exits in the world. Some are fast, some are drawn out and slow. They each have their pros and cons. I would imagine you see different pros and cons and different manners of passing as well. But have you ever been faced with a client that was combative or that you found difficult, or are they usually vetted well and you don't get that sort of a situation for you?
I have not had any issues with anyone being combative.
Mhm.
Often by the time I meet them, their care is managed pretty well for the most part.
Uh-huh.
And so, I think that often at that point I become more caregiver to the caregiver,
Right.
right? Because they've been on this journey the whole time.
It must be interesting for you to see when it's somebody with dementia, sometimes they speak and may even get a look in their eyes that they're 19 again, and they can remember things from that time, and other times not know where they're at. So it's got to be interesting for you with the dementia patients in particular, I would imagine,
Mm-hmm.
just because you get glimpses into their past
Yeah.
and their youth and the music and who they loved, that, Johnny Boy and I carved our names in a tree, that's something, colorful stories from them, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Do you write them down for the living families so that they can hear that by any chance? I'm just curious.
I do write a lot, whether I meet the families or not, especially when I'm with a hospice patient who I have never met before and not met their family. So I definitely have a romantic side of me. And so I might be sitting with someone, I'll get clues in their room to who they were in the life that I imagine they have lived. So, I'll choose music that I think that maybe they grew up with, or I'll try to meet them in those ways, just because I think that whether we have dementia or not, we all still have that youthfulness within us.
Yes, that's spark.
And I want to
sure.
honor that lifetime for them.
And you're absolutely right. Music
Mm-hmm.
is one of the fastest ways to bring back memories and emotions, and unlocking all of those fantastic stories of their lives. Music can trigger memories in people, unlike most things I've seen.
Absolutely.
So,
music is a huge part of the bedside visits for me. I make playlists for people, and I love to get people to collaborate with me, family members, so that those playlists are things. I even still listen to playlists that I made for clients who've long gone.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're like a DJ Death Doula.
I am. I'm kind of like a party planner in a way.
There you go. Well, I guess it kind of is a party.
Yeah.
It's a biggest moment of your life party. We have birth when we come into the world and we're screaming and we're like, why did you take me out of that warm place? And you come into the world, and then they celebrate your birthday every year. And then all of a sudden birthdays aren't happy for you, and you don't want to celebrate them quite as much, and because you're getting up in years. And for that end of life, I think a lot of the reason people fear that unknown in dying is because death has for a long time been painted, and has been for many people, a sterile environment, possibly lonely. Maybe there's nobody there for you at that time, or that actually cared. Maybe they just came to make sure you're really gone. I mean, I've seen some things, I'm sure you have too.
Yeah.
And so people become afraid of it because becoming old doesn't seem sexy, which is sort of what we're taught in life. Beauty, talent, our skills, a sharp mind. These are all things that we hold dear to us and work on throughout our life. And then all of a sudden, the world stops giving you gifts and starts taking them away. And you can't hold on to them hard enough to keep them for yourself. And so I think what you give back to the people who are dying, aside from the dignity, are these moments to smile. And they haven't had much of a reason to feel elevated or for their heart to feel light in a long time. And I feel like you give people that in that home stretch that they're in to the finish line. So I find that invaluable.
Well, that's
really
my greatest intention. I think that you hit on something really important about rites of passage, right? So we celebrate all of these things, and then death becomes, you describe this cold environment. So death has become like medicine failed, right? And so
Yes.
died, and so there's all this fear around: am I going to be in pain? Am I going to be alone? Right? I think that one of the gifts of death doulas, and one of the benefits of working with them, is we can start to expand what's possible. Death doesn't have to look that way. It can look many different ways. And that's why, I was jokingly calling myself a party planner, but, I'm going to sit down with people and ask them, how do you want it to feel? Who's there? Who's not there? What do you want to smell? What are the sounds that you hear? And,
right.
Or, do you want to have a living funeral? Let's celebrate you while you can hear all the wonderful things that people are saying about you.
I think a lot of what people are afraid of is they're going to die and there's not going to be anything on the other side, that's going to be the end.
Yeah.
And so I deal on that end.
Right.
And I sense you do as well, in that, in your center that there's something more because you've experienced it through your aunt. Was it your aunt that passed and your uncle saw her?
Yeah.
And so you probably have a little bit of ability yourself. And obviously, I think it runs in your family. And your uncle was probably just a generation that was a pragmatic male. And some of that's starting to slip a little. They're getting a little bit more open emotionally and spiritually. So it'll be interesting through the years for you to see how the generation's energy differs in letting go. Like, who's more fearful of letting go. And I think there's going to be some generations that believe in an afterlife, and the people that believe in an afterlife are far less afraid to pass because they know they're going to be okay. Yeah. They know they'll be restored.
Yeah, I'd love to hear you talk about that, because I feel like I walk people, I think of myself as I walk them to the edge, right? And you pick up. And so there's all this information that you have, in my mind, and what I witness is there's a healing that happens, right? When you talk about curing, that's different. But when we talk about healing, that to me is the moment of death. And then, I want to hear, what is that like, that healing moment, or that to me, it feels like we're able to really dissect what's important at that point, right? We're able to let go of all the things that don't matter anymore.
The word they often use when I bring them through, when they were broken towards the end, whether it be a fentanyl overdose and they had drug addiction, or they were ill, and they often say their body betrayed them, but the word they often use is restored. They say, I'm restored, I'm whole, I'm calm, I'm happy and fulfilled. And these are the words that they use to describe themselves. They also revert to the age they were the happiest. So when I do a reading, they'll give me an age. For instance, I did one yesterday and I brought his wife through. She kept showing 27. I said, your wife's showing herself at 27. So that would be her heaven on earth, because we go back to whatever our heaven on earth was to that age. And it varies depending on how somebody died. But she went back to 27, and I said, why was 27 important to her? She would have had to be in love, beginning her life, getting married, having children. Usually that's for women, that's the time they'll go back to, unless they resented it and then they go further back. But anyways, she went back to 27, and he said, that was the age she was when we sat in the car and we planned our whole life together and decided to spend it together. And so that began her heaven, in that he was her heaven. And I told him, I said, they often relay to me, as she was in the reading, why they stay. And people often say, I don't know why they hang around. Why would they want to be here when they could be in heaven? This place is awful. It's like, okay, Grinchy. So, okay, I get it. We got a lot of problems. But the reason they stay is because their heaven isn't complete without us. And which is why I titled my second book, We Are Their Heaven, because 9 times out of 10, even though they could be over there, they seem to stay around the living more because their living loved ones are versions of their heaven. So she was waiting for him because her heaven wasn't complete without him. That doesn't mean she can't experience other relatives over there. It doesn't mean she can't, go roller skating with her girlfriend Jenny, in the 8th grade if she wants to relive that moment. But when his heart hurts, it pulls her to him. Or when he's thinking of her or looking at a picture of her, it automatically pulls her to him because it's a need. The living have a need, and they can feel that pull. And so they sort of straddle the two worlds until their heaven is complete. And so with what you see with people transitioning, just knowing there are people like you that can help take that fear away, and that time, that point in their life, something I'm not sure that I would be well equipped for. I'm much better dealing with the dead once they've already crossed. But I do believe that if they can get past that, everything after that, every moment is not just blissful. I don't want to say blissful. They see everything. They feel everything intensely. They see any damage they caused. They feel love on a higher level because they're not bound by life circumstances. Maybe they were beaten as a child. Maybe you were molested. Maybe all of that's gone when you cross, and you become the best version of yourself minus all the scars that we collect through life. So the moms that die that people say, oh, I wasn't close to my mom, she was kind of an angry person. The chip on her shoulder is gone. Often in the readings, they'll describe where that chip came from. What happened to them to make them that way? Not as an excuse, but for you to understand, or the client to understand. And I find it just so interesting that when we die, we feel everything we cause to other people, good or bad, we're aware of, like acutely aware of. And they try and reconcile any of the bad. And they're touched by the good. I've brought doctors through who have all of these patients standing behind them. Some of them they could save, and some of them they couldn't. And often the ones that they couldn't aren't upset that they couldn't. They're grateful that he tried. So people don't see it through the eyes of the dead. And I'm trying to show people what that looks like so we can look at life a little differently. There's so many people that think they make no difference. And I'll do a reading and bring somebody through and say to my client, do you understand, but for your existence, his versions of heaven wouldn't exist? That you gave him that, or you came in late in life and gave him unconditional love. I don't think the living are good at acknowledging the magnitude of our contribution to each other.
Right.
So it's very vast on the other side. So if you can get them through the ugliness of that birth to the other side, I can take care of the rest.
And it's interesting you called it that. I witness it very much like a labor sometimes. It feels like that, and there have been moments where they're laboring so hard that when they eventually do leave their body, I'll whisper, "You did it, good job."
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
Because it's hard work to leave your body sometimes, and I will let people know what that dying process looks like. Because it can be very similar, unless someone's dying suddenly or tragically, which is a entirely different conversation. If someone is dying from a long illness, I'll let them know, don't be surprised if you get visitors that no one else can see, and they're letting you know that they're making the way for you. And I think that gives them comfort, and I think it gives the people around them comfort as well. And another thing that I feel like doulas do is, we call it holding space, right? And so to me, that means I'm going to put an energetic bubble around this person that is doing their dying work, because that's really what it looks like to me. They go deep inward, and I feel like they have one foot here and one foot there, and they might be gesturing or talking to, silently, but I see that they're kind of like settling their affairs. At least that's what it looks like to me. So that's my imagining. That's what's happening.
the other side's often explaining to them what's going to happen,
Okay.
what's happening to them. And sometimes they'll, out of fear, will try and stay or hold on to their body because they're afraid that if they let go, everything ends. And so sometimes there's a negotiation that
Okay.
takes
It
place
looks like that.
from the other side.
Hmm.
Yeah, where they're saying, I'm your grandmother, I'm your dad, I'm your child, you know, I'm here, you're fine, your loved ones are going to be fine who are left behind. You'll still be able to see them. That seems important to them to know. You're still going to be able to check in on your living loved ones. That might help some of your
Hmm.
clients to know that's not a wives' tale. They will be able to be there whenever they want to be there. In truth, they're there more than they were in the living world because you're not separated by distance or time. You know, you can be in that chair at the Thanksgiving Day table whenever you want, you know, and they love it when we set them a place and include them in our life. And they're waiting for the living to say, I still want you to be a part of my life.
I love that.
So it's sort of amazing when they cross, if they can truly feel and understand that they're still going to be able to have those moments and that the people they love will still feel and hear them and that they'll be able to save the lives of the people they love in the living world because they're the buffers. And in certain situations, they can act in defense of us if it's not written in stone that we have to die, which is why a lot of people survive car accidents that they can't figure out how they didn't get ejected out that window, you know, how they survived.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because the person who passed that's connected to them acts as a buffer in that moment to push them back or to minimize the damage. So once they know they have a function on the other side and then they're not just up sitting on a cloud playing a harp, I think it makes them feel better. I probably need to write something about that. It makes them feel better knowing that they're still going to be part of the family, that they're still going to be embraced and welcomed and introduced in the holidays, and they're going to see the babies being born, and they're going to be an important part as the guardians that oversee the living loved ones that they have. So
you should definitely write that. I love that.
I will. I'll have to do that. And for you, you know, if The Wizard of Oz was their favorite movie, do you sometimes sit and watch a movie with them? Do you?
Yeah, whatever it is that I think of myself as like a first mate on a ship. Right, they're driving the ship, and I'm just going to make sure they have everything they need on board. And so I have to let go of my own preconceived ideas of how I think it should go, and I have to remind myself that it's not my job to fix, and I'm just going to be there with them. Right, that's my promise. I'm going to walk with you, and so that might mean we decorate the house for Christmas in July. Right, you
Right.
know,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
whatever that.
I know because my friend Domini, when she had cancer, and this is when she died at 31. This was a long time ago. I think I was 29 at the time. So, you know, dinosaurs roam the earth and all. But when she passed, we had her make a list of things she wanted to do before she died, and we threw her a going away party.
Mm-hmm.
Or a till we meet again party. And I invited everybody that we knew and our teens that we got in trouble with and tubed the river with and did all those fun things with. And they all came. And she had wanted to go up north to Prescott with the pine trees and the birds and all that. And she just wasn't well enough to make that trip. So the best we could do is we got a bunch of plants, and I got like a big bluebird mylar balloon, and we like decorated her apartment to sort of look woodsy because it's the best we could do. And to give her that moment.
Yep.
Or she'd never had a lobster before. So me and my other friend that was a mutual friend of hers, we took her to get her a lobster and did those things with her. And people are like, I don't know what to do with them while they're dying. It's like, really? Because I'm pretty sure they can come up with a list that could help you out.
Right.
If you really mean you want to do something for them.
Right. Those conversations are really hard. I think having them frequently and making them dinner, like around the table dinner time conversations, they should be that normal. Right.
Right.
And that's why I do a lot of guest speaking, and I love the idea that even if it's just like a little spark and it gives someone some inspiration to bring up a new conversation that night. And you don't know
Yeah.
what's going to happen. A couple days ago, I talked with a death and dying class at a university, and the young people in the room asked the best questions. And I just know that all that information is just going to ripple out. And I love the idea of
Yes.
doing death differently.
Yes. I applaud that. I think we're going to see more of that. Is this an American thing or do they do this around the
Yeah,
world?
no, well, it's interesting. So, we can call this like a death doula movement, but honestly, it's really, we're coming back to ancient practices, right? We always
Yeah.
known how to care for our dying people as a community. And so that's a big part of what doulas are trying to do is bringing death back to the community. But it is, people are becoming doulas all over the world. People are becoming home funeral experts. A lot of young people are becoming funeral directors. I know you've had some interesting ones on your show.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of things happening out there, and I love the conversation because there's a lot of resources out there now that people didn't realize. I mean, I still talk to people who think that you legally have to be embalmed.
Right.
They don't have any
Right.
idea, and so when it comes
My
to
stepdad's Jewish, so we know that's not true.
but I think it's really important to advocate. I had a client who died very recently, and I came to their home. The hospice nurses were still there, and they had told his wife that his body needed to be removed immediately. And that's not the case. In my state, he can legally stay there for 24 hours. And so being able to write that for her so she could spend
Sure.
24 more hours with her beloved, that made my
Right.
work like worth all of it. I went home that day feeling like this is why I'm here. Right?
Right.
She had the
Well,
moments with him, and it was beautiful.
you have a calling and you're trying to act as sort of that buffer between the living and the dead too.
Mm-hmm.
An advocate for them.
Yeah. And so I wanted to ask you, this is something that feels really important to me as I get deeper into this work. I'm starting to think of it as reverse engineering. So the more that I work with death, the more it informs my life, right? And it seems really simple, but
Mhm.
is that true for you as well?
The more that I do this, the more that I live better. Is that
Right. Or
what you
right. Does
mean?
it help you to think about your life differently or what matters and what
Oh,
doesn't matter?
yeah. And that's the way I tried to write my books is what have I learned from the dead and how can we live our lives better?
Yes.
So, absolutely. That's why I'm less affected by what people will say. People are like, "Oh my God, well, what'll they think?" It's like, who cares? I'm like, are they going to be at your funeral? No. Why do you care? Like, we put so much power in the hands of people that just don't matter in the grand scheme of our life. So, if I'm blunt and to the point, and I speak my truth, some people might find it irritating or offensive, but I don't care.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of the beauty of my life is that I can live it that way. And if I feel like doing something, I don't need to ask people's permission. I'm going to do it because I want to. I only have so many days on this living plane and I want them to be memorable. I want to die with my hair on fire, high-fiving the dead as I pass. I know there's going to be a fantastic open bar party for me. There's going to be a cocktail like I've never had in the living world. And they're just going to be like, "What took you so long?" And it's going to be fantastic. So I already know what my other side will be. I will be with Joe. I will be watching over the girls. One day they'll be there as well, but and then you've got that beautiful reunion where you never have to say goodbye again. So I actually relate more to the dead than I do to the living. The living have a lot of issues, and the dead always tell me that we're the dead ones, that they're more alive than we are. And all of this hang up in language and, oh, you hurt my feelings and all that. I don't have time for that. And that may be an unpopular thing for some people to hear, but then cover your ears. This is how I feel and it's how I'm going to live my life. And for the people out there that go through life editing themselves, just stop. Like just stop because the people that seem to be offended by the simplest things aren't the people that really care about you. So, I mean, you just can't give it that kind of weight and value in your life. So, yeah, the dead have taught me a lot. I'd rather live like I'm dead. And so when I call my show The Dead Life, it's actually the dead part of that title carries more energy to me than the word life. And so for the people that, if you Google dead, like if I put dead in on YouTube, there's no commercial spots. There's certain,
Right.
they don't put you in as a vehicle as much. They don't send you the traffic because of that word, or the word suicide, things like that. So you have to be careful not to use a word that is so natural and inevitable in all of our lives. And it makes no sense. Just because people are afraid of it, like the word dead, like you're going to die, it's contagious.
Right.
They think death is contagious. And that's why when somebody close to you loses somebody and that person dies, all of a sudden your friends stop calling because they don't know what to say to you. Or what if you get that juju on your daughter and she's in a car accident, it's like, it doesn't work that way. To be more human, we actually need to lean in and help people when they're grieving. We need to help people when they're going through this metamorphosis of life and death and transitioning. And that's the most human part of us. And we've fallen so far and gotten away from it. And I'm so happy to hear from you that people are starting to figure out what actually matters. With the old folks' homes, the assisted livings, they should have margarita fountains, and like they should be bringing in great acts, like get Jimmy Buffett down there, have a parrot head day, and let them have a good time. If they want to go somewhere, take them. I don't understand this treating them like children. After they've worked their whole life and sacrificed, that's the payoff. No wonder people are afraid to get old and die.
Yeah.
That's why.
Yeah, very lonely.
Yeah.
I'm like you, I'm really inspired by death in that way. And so I created a course that I just completed, I think December, January. It's called Gratitude and Grace. It's a guide to conscious living. And I've taken all of those things, we talk about forgiveness. We talk about really finding your authentic self, end of life regrets. And there's lots of meditations and journaling and I wanted to pack it full of all those little nuggets, like, the things I come home and write down after I'm sitting with dying people. So I was really inspired to share that because it's changed my life so much.
I think that the listeners would be incredibly interested in knowing more about that. So maybe we can add some sort of a link or put it on,
it's on my website.
The information. Yeah. It's on your website. Yes. Okay. Which we'll give at the end. And I did wonder if someone's given a terminal diagnosis, is that when you look for a death doula, like ahead of time? Or is there a certain stage in dying that you reach out for a death doula?
The only wrong time to plan your death is when you're dying, right? There's no wrong time. I have clients that don't even have terminal diagnoses. So
people can set it up ahead of time, like, in case something happens.
Folder.
We're gonna have to find a way to make you live forever.
Right, exactly. So I'm in people's folders. I'm working with someone right now who does not have a diagnosis yet, but may possibly. And what that does is whether the diagnosis happens or not, death will happen eventually, right? And so it's not a waste of time to have the important conversations to quote unquote, get your affairs in order. And that's something death doulas help with all the time.
And it would be amazing if there was a way to illustrate how almost a way of the beauty of transition. And so people can imagine what it would look like or what that might look like for them instead of the sterile hospitals we all got raised around and that weird smell of medicine and dying mixed together. It's sort of a traumatic sensation. when you're around it at a young age because it feels adverse to everything you are, which it probably is at that point because you haven't gone all the way through life. But to children, we all look like crypt keepers. You know? They look at us and they're like, you're so old, you're 29. It's like, oh my gosh, perspective, child. But it's true. So maybe there's a visual way where you could have a package where they can design the way they want to die in a sort of a video form of, this is what I want the room to look like. This is the music I want. This is the food I want. Bring me in the cognac. I don't care what I say. I love it.
That's great. Well, you can ask Joe. I'm not a good tech person, but I am working on, I'm an Aries. I'm constantly, creating new things. So I'm working on an end of life.
Well, happy birthday. Cause I know we're in Aries birthday season.
I just started creating a workbook. And so I want to, actually it's going to be a binder, and it will have folders in it. It will have like vigil questions. It's going to have your forms in it. It's going to have your account numbers, all the things. And so that when someone is, becomes ill or is dying, it's all right there. It's going to, from the practical things to the spiritual things, all in one place. So those are the questions that I love to ask people,
I think it would be wise for them to even give you a copy of the most updated will, because I work on the end where I see the kids fighting over things, and one of them removed something or took mom's ring. And give your jewelry to your children before you die.
Yes.
Just save you some hurt and division of family. Just do that.
Yeah.
Things like that are important for them to know. Maybe they don't think about those things. That could be useful in your packet as well.
Absolutely.
Have a night where you have your daughter over and you give her the things and why it matters to you and when you got it, and write it all down for her and give it to her with meaning instead of her getting it off of your cold hand after you die. I mean, that would be so helpful.
Yeah, I advise that often.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Mm-hmm.
So where can people find you? Can you give us your website? And we'll also put it up on my website so people can connect to you.
Yeah, there are a couple places where I am right now. My website is dearlybelovedlife.com. And that's where you can find all.
Okay, who didn't just hear Prince in their head? Dearly
that's
beloved,
why,
we are gathered.
Sometimes I have to sing the whole thing. I'm a funeral celebrant too, so I write funerals, and so I want to imagine myself standing up there, dearly beloved. So that's why I called it Dearly Beloved Life. And so you'll find some information about being a funeral celebrant and a death doula and a mentor. And then my online course, Gratitude and Grace, can be accessed from my website as well. And I'm also on a new association called the Florida End of Life Doula Association. We are organizing doulas, and I'm hoping this is going to start happening nationwide, but I think we're one of the first in the country to organize doulas statewide. I'm really excited about that. So I'm chairing the board we called ourselves FIOLDA, Florida End of Life Doula Association. We have a website as well. And, it's a great way to connect with doulas in the state of Florida. And, there are also some nationwide ways to do that.
Well, I live in the other we're going there to die state, which is Arizona. So maybe we can get like a sister branch over here for the people retiring. I'm telling you, I think there's a lot of people out there that have a lot of fear around dying. You and the people working with you that have the same intention you do, which is to ease people's minds and make the transition smooth and almost joyful. So that people can really understand the meaning of that person's life and the totality of the gifts that they left us with, how important they are. So I'm just hoping that with people such as yourself, this will become rampant. Are there men doing this? Are there male death doulas, or do you find it overwhelmingly female?
Primarily female, but in my trainings and in fact on our board, we have a male death doula. I'd say it's a smaller amount, but not common.
I was just curious. It's the same with mediums. There are just more female mediums. It's just is what it is. We're more emotionally available.
Well, and I think that historically we are the caregivers, right?
Yes, sure.
But I am seeing quite a few male doulas.
Well, I hope for any of my young listeners or for YouTube who are watching this, that they will reach out to you. I feel there are a lot of people going through life feeling like they want to do something important, that they want to have a calling and they can't put their finger on it. And I think that this is a perfect opportunity for anybody who has any level of spirituality, but also wanting to give people that that moment of kindness and compassion, and to elevate the dying instead of making it something dark. I always see them as, hey, you made it 93 years. That's great. That's a great run. You had a great run, and people always think it's kind of strange that I'll say things like that. But I see the 7-year-olds that die of leukemia, and the 22-year-olds dying of fentanyl, a lot of that. And it's nice to see somebody got to live a long life, and all I can hope is they made good use of their years.
Right.
And so for you to tie it up with a nice satin bow at the end seems apropos for a life well lived. So I'm hoping people will reach out to you. I know they will. Well, Lynn Principe, thank you so much for sharing your valuable information with us today. And let me just say, I know you're an Aries, but there's something very grounding about your energy. You have a very calm, energetic, but grounded energy. It's a nice balance.
I appreciate that.
So you're just a wonderful resource for people facing end-of-life decisions or meaningful careers, a death doula. So thank you for being here, and we'll have to have you back for sure.
Yeah.
And if you ever have those questions about life after death, I'm happy to answer those for you as well. Thank you to my listeners for tuning in. Tune in next Tuesday for a new episode of The Dead Life. I'm Allison Dubois, and this is The Dead Life. To all of my believers out there, don't stop believing.